Welcome to Governance This Week, where we delve into policy issues shaping our world. Today, we look into the looming spectre of online disinformation in the lead up to the European elections, which take place in June 2024. Here at the European University Institute, and in particular at the Florence School of Transnational Governance, we do a lot of work on this topic. So we've invited Paolo Cesarini, the program director of both the European Digital Media Observatory and the European Media and Information Fund here at the UI to look at what's at stake. So welcome, Paolo.
Hi.
Great to have you here in the studio. And let's start by talking a little bit about the areas that are most vulnerable to disinformation in the run-up to the European elections. What are those areas?
Well, it is a bit of a challenging question, this one, because the European elections are in fact the sum of 27 different national campaigns. And each national contest, it is more vulnerable than others to specific narratives or to specific topics. So what is important here to underline it is to have a level of readiness in order to intercept the narratives as they come forward in the information space during the campaign. But we are ready, I think. The European Digital Media Observatory has already done quite a good work by setting up a specific task force that will follow the European elections, the European Parliament elections. It has actually started to work already the last year and followed quite closely elections and referenda that took place in 12 different European countries. That gives us already a bit of a flavor of what we can expect now in the next couple of months. There is a common thread beyond the diversity of the national context in which this election will take place. There is a common thread, which is the tendency of disinformation actors to attack the election as a process. So to allege frauds in the manner in which, for instance, votes are counted, malfunction of the electronic vote or the postal vote, or other types of frauds like the erasable pencils or pre-marked ballots. Those were topics, narratives that emerged during the last year elections. And we must be prepared to see this type of attacks coming up again. Beyond that, I would say that if one look at policy areas, as I said, each national campaign is very much susceptible to local sensitivities. But again, I would say that in the context of a increasingly tense geopolitical landscape, we can expect topics like the Ukrainian war to be exploited in order to divide the unity of Europe, to create tensions around this topic, as well as other policies which are increasingly becoming common to all European countries, like economy, climate change, immigration, exclusion, social issues around these topics, gender issues, LGBTQ plus questions. I would expect this type of broad narratives to be exploited in order to create confusion in the political debate. And in each member state, in each European countries, there is the likelihood that these broad narratives will be declinated with the insertion of national specificities, including discrediting specific political actors, and therefore creating this type of divisions within the vote and confusion in voters' minds.
Paolo, unfortunately, we know from research that online disinformation campaigns are particularly effective, that people are susceptible to disinformation. This we know. So let's look a little bit about at how the European Union, in collaboration actually with member states, particularly in this case of the European elections, very relevant, in collaboration with member states but also with tech platforms, how does the European Union address the challenge of things like deepfakes but also all kinds of other forms of mis and disinformation?
Well, certainly the emergence of generative AI represents a new threat. Generative AI can produce very quickly very convincing text or videos or images that produce what people call hallucinations. Therefore, compelling piece of content that are very hard for ordinary people to distinguish from real content. And that add a layer on the top of other techniques and manipulations that we are more familiar with. Amplifications, use of bots, use of fake accounts, all sorts of algorithmic manipulations that are also built into the platform systems and create therefore a risk of a disinformation on steroid happening for this electoral campaign. I think again, I don't want to look too optimistic, but at least this time there are measures that have been taken in a way that we are more prepared to combat this attempt in collaboration with the online platforms, particularly the very large online platforms. The collaboration and their own willingness to actually take their own responsibility seriously and to take the measures that are necessary to mitigate these risks are fundamental. The European Commission is going to issue in the next days a set of guidelines to ensure election integrity. And there is a specific, there are a lot of measures there, but that include also measures that should enable more transparency around AI-generated content, since you asked me particularly this question. I think that there are certain very good ideas in these guidelines. If one look at the level of the creation of synthetic content, the pledge for watermarking content that is artificially created, and that therefore is a responsibility that is incumbent on those that produce the models and the systems that apply the foundational model of AI. It is a very good idea, but it is not the only one. I think it's very important also to look at the quality of the data that are used by large language models and by AI systems in order to create content. The reliability, the trustfulness of the underlying data is key, especially when it comes to elections. So the fact that the machines will be pooling the information from authoritative sources when it comes to electoral process, voting procedures, timing of the voting, and all the rest is very, very important. There is also an issue about shaping these systems in a way that the room for manipulating prompts that then will give you an answer, a text, a content, or a video, or an image based on such a prompt, it is strongly reduced. So that is a question of safety, essentially, to design the system in a way that limit or block the manipulation of prompts or block certain prompts that can be particularly harmful because they are inciting, in a way, the machine to give the false content. And finally, I would say also very important the fact to, as much as possible, to quote the sources This is something that normally, if you check on Chat GPT, you don't know where the answers, the text that are produced are coming from. So quoting the source could be a very important improvement. And when it comes to VLOPs, so the very large online platforms, the one that all we know use and know, from Meta to Google, YouTube, and X, there are kind of measures that they should consider. For instance, labeling generative AI content, and make sure that this labeling does not disappear as that content it is shared from one user to another. That is another measure that should be taken very much into account. And the other point that I would like to make it is about the role that and the specific position that the privileged position that the platforms have in terms of making users aware of such risks. So everything that revolves around media literacy, around the awareness that can be raised towards the users regarding the use of generative AI, particularly during the election, is very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. You already mentioned the word media literacy. In fact, I would like to go a little bit beyond the role of the European Union and the tech platforms. What can civil society organizations and independent media do, to help counter disinformation in the lead up to the elections? And in particular, of course, I'm thinking of activities in the area of media literacy and critical thinking. What kind of things can they contribute?
I think there is an emerging consensus in academic circles that pre-banking, so preparing the people in advance about the disinformation risks that they can incur, particularly during critical periods like elections, could be effective in raising their resilience and stimulating their critical thinking. But pre-banking is not an easy game. It is important that these forms of so-called inoculations are made are quite specific. So, and that comes back to your first question, meaning what would be the areas that would be particularly exposed to disinformation campaigns, which is not an easy thing, particularly if you think about the 27 different campaigns that takes place simultaneously in parallel during that period, that may have a lot of variation. So in terms of pre-banking techniques, one is perhaps to insist very much around the risk of having the electoral process delegitimized through narratives that cast into doubt the fairness and the regularity of the procedures put in place for that, because we know that that could be a common theme and is quite specific, or to focus on the manipulation techniques that are typically used by disinformers. Which techniques? But we know, and there are studies around that, there are mainly 5 types of manipulation that psychologically affect the audiences, but that can be pre-banked by alerting the audiences about such techniques. Decontextualization is a classic one. An example: taking bits and pieces of member of the parliament speeches out of context, and to pretend that such a member of the parliament has positions that are likely creating confusion in the audiences. It has been done. The example, for instance, of MEPs being kind of presented as being supportive of Hamas, by simply extrapolating certain statements and put them out of context. So decontextualization, people should be aware of this. The second is about scapegoating. Try to identify specific groups, the techniques that consist in identifying specific groups or persons or entities as responsible for all the evils of this world. I'll give you another example. The Ukrainian refugees has very much been tainted with, by the narrative whereby they would have been beneficiaries of social benefits that not even the nationals are entitled to. So creating in that way not only a hostility towards the refugees themselves, but also an opposition against the policies that support Ukraine during the war. Another way is fear-mongering. So to raise the level of anxiety and fears across the population. In France, for instance, they are very susceptible to this type of generic, it's very much linked to conspiracy theories, no? Le grand remplacement, the great replacement. During electoral times, to insist on this type of broad narratives of these conspiracy theories can serve the purpose of a particular party or particular political orientation against another one, while being based on exaggerations and psychological manipulation, essentially. Polarization, clearly, exaggerating the positions that are in dialogue during a campaign by presenting both as more extreme than they are, more apart than they are. That is a way to lower the level of trust, confidence, and hope that people have in such democratic processes. And finally, I would say discrediting. That is something that's in some member states, including the one I know the best, is very well very known, very well used and very known, which is simply personal attacks on politicians, based normally on false premises. Yeah. I think it would be important in this period that journalists, the media, and NGOs that are particularly focused on media literacy actions prepare the voters by making them more aware of these risks of psychological manipulation, and therefore to pre-bank the disinformation that can pollute the whole political debate.
Great. Let's see a little bit what happens in this space in the weeks ahead. Very interesting to look at those different mechanisms up close, and thanks for sharing that with us, Paolo. We have not talked specifically about the actors yet, so let's do that a little bit. And in particular, let's talk about foreign actors. We know that they are very relevant if we talk about online disinformation in the context of the European elections or in the context of whatever happens within the European Union. So how can the EU strengthen its response mechanisms to deal, to identify these actors and counter their interference in the elections?
What has happened the last week, the last Thursday, with the attacks, the horrible, barbarian attacks in Russia, in the theater, with the killings, that the attribution of which has created already now a flood of disinformation, with the allegations of Ukraine being behind or be supportive of the culprits of such attacks, demonstrate how the geopolitical landscape influence the debate that it is mainly driven by, or should be driven by, mainly by domestic issues. The last months, in February, not roughly a month ago, the French Foreign Minister, Stéphane Séjourné, has announced the discovery of a wide network of pro-Kremlin websites, almost 200 websites that acted in a coordinated way in order to pollute our information space in a way that create disunity and disagreement and tensions within our own domestic debates. So certainly the presence of an hostile neighbor in this particular historical phase is something that has to be taken very seriously. But Russia is not the only one. China, it is also coming up as an active actor in the disinformation space. And many other countries around the world are increasingly exposed or produce disinformation for political and sometimes economic gains. Again, all this has been a slow learning process from the institutional point of view, and what measures have to be put in place have become more and more specific and more precise. There is a toolbox, for instance, in terms of foreign interference. There is a toolbox that the European External Action Service has put in place in order to make cooperation between authorities of the member states more focused and more effective by having common terminology, common protocols, and share working methods and exchange of information on a permanent basis, including the creation of a rapid alert system, and that type of institutional cooperation between authorities of member states, it is critical but not sufficient. Disinformation is a global phenomenon. Therefore, cooperation going beyond the strict boundaries of the European Union is necessary. That's why the level of coordination with NATO, with the G7, but also with like-minded countries like UK, US, of course, has been increased considerably during the last years. So that it is what, at the institutional level, is being done, has been done, and still is work in progress. But let's not forget that this is a whole of government, but also a whole of society challenge. Yeah. So again, the fact of being now able to mobilize large and specialized, let's say, sectors of the civil society, of the media, with a community of fact-checkers that has become incredibly more organized than was the case for the previous European elections in 2019. There are, let's say, good grounds on which we need to build. And the European Digital Media Observatory, it is also the result itself, is a result of these efforts. We are also part of these ecosystems of actors that all together are engaged in countering all sorts of disinformation, including that which originates from foreign states.
Yeah. Paolo, in conclusion, let's have a look at the potential long-term implications of widespread disinformation, right? And what it means in terms of legitimacy and trust, in this case in the European elections, but also probably more broadly in terms of legitimacy and trust in the democratic process. It's a bit difficult to look at the future, but what are your views on these potential long-term implications?
The long-term implication of disinformation is extremely serious. Maria Ressa, Nobel Prize, for the work that she has been doing through her organization, Rappler, she's used to say that without shared facts, there is no shared reality. Without shared reality, there is no possibility to have a debate, a democratic debate. And if there is no democratic debate, then the system of our democracies is doomed to crumble down, to disgregate. Hence, I think the efforts that so many different actors, and particularly I insist on the fact that actors that are not necessarily and only government actors, but they are the expression of the civil society, of the media. All these efforts that are being built up during the last years are extremely valuable, and while the threats are in fact not disappearing, they're becoming increasingly, the landscape is becoming increasingly challenging due to the technological evolution that we mentioned before, AI-generated content, for instance. While the level of threat and the threat landscape itself is changing constantly, I think that the fact that there is an ecosystem of actors that is really engaged in combating these forms of manipulation, it is encouraging.
Yeah. Well, Paolo, thanks so much for sharing so much information on this crucial topic with us in a crucial time in Europe. We're going to see how this all pans out in the weeks ahead and the months ahead. Thanks for joining us today. To our viewers, I say, for those of you interested in the topic, just to kind of recap that both the European Digital Media Observatory, a hub for multidisciplinary response to online disinformation, does a lot of important work at edmo.eu. You can find more information. On the other hand, there is the European Media and Information Fund, which provides grants to organizations, to specific projects tackling online disinformation. So if you're interested, go and check out those two organizations. And of course, keep following this channel. Subscribe if you haven't done that yet. And see you soon for a next episode. Thank you.